Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to the workbench here at Beyond Guitars. I'm Dave Bloxham, and we have Mike's dad's Gibson Mastertone banjo neck here. Last video, I took all the finish off of this neck, and it is ready for more work. So we're going to start in pulling the frets right now, right after this. Right, well, here it is in all its glory, and we're just going to make it look worse before it looks better. Well, that's the way it goes when you're doing this kind of thing. I'm not accustomed to being watched, so bear with me. This is my first time trying to video this kind of thing. I've done it many times, but never on camera. Anyway, we are going to get started here. I'm going to show you what I use to get started. This is what I like to use. This is a double bag sandbag. This is actually meant for photography. I bought this to support my C-stands on my photography equipment. But today we're going to use it. Works beautifully for this, especially because it has two sandbags. It really supports the neck well. I can push down, I can move it around. It doesn't rock around at all. This is a little fret file, but I did a little testing and I found out that the fret end dressing file is great for removing some of this crud along the frets. And it's important for me to remove it because I need for my fret tang nippers to get in under the crown of the fret and pull it up. These nippers are unique in that they are ground flush at the top, so that the biting surface of the nippers is right at the face. So when you nip, it cuts the frets off. The new frets will go in like this. You cut them off flush with the side of the neck, and they really slip under the frets well. So I can square this up and pull a fret pretty easily, but I do need to get as low as humanly possible, and that means that I need to get rid of the crud and dirt that's built up along the bottom edge. So we'll get a close-up here, and you can probably see it a little better now, but we do have a fair amount of crud. This one that was my test bed. You can see that this one in particular, there's quite a bit of mucky stuff, including corrosion along there. So I'm going to use a very light touch so I don't scratch the wood. Since I'm going across the grain, you certainly don't want to gouge it, but I am going to sand the fretboard, so any little mark I make is going to be sanded out. And first thing I want to do is gently, and it is leaving a mark, but that's very superficial. That's not in the wood, actually. That's just in the the history. I guess we're taking the history off, but that's the point. You can see the crud that's coming up, and some of it's lopping over onto the fret itself. And to try and see some of it there, try and mitigate this dirt, I will put a towel under it and just gently try and clean a reasonable amount of the crud away from the base of the fret, that base of the crown anyway. Now I do want to talk a little bit about the kind of fret job this banjo had at the factory and what we're going to do to replace them. And Gibson is known for doing this particular style of fret installation that not everyone likes. It's called fret nibs, and that is only on fully bound instruments, and this has binding up the sides. You'll see some guitars and banjos that don't have binding on the edges, and you can just see the fret ends here, but the binding covers the fret ends on a fully bound neck. But not only the ends on a Gibson, at least most of them anyway. What they do when they install these frets at the factory is they put the frets in first before the binding. So the binding is not installed. We just have a groove, or a, what would you call it, a route for the binding to be installed on, and that's all there is. And then they install the fret. Just be sure you go gently when you clean these up. Install the fret without binding. Cut them flush with some tool, maybe something similar to this. and then bind it. So the binding is left tall, though. It's left high, and it's in most cases higher than the frets. And what they do then is start scraping the binding down to the tops of the frets. And if you can imagine something like that, it's hard to put into words exactly, but the binding sticks up proud of the fret. They scrape it down to the top of the frets, and they keep scraping this binding in between the frets until it meets the fretboard. So we end up with the binding coming up at the end of the fret and back down. And those are the little nibs. And you can barely see nibs left on this one. These frets are so worn out that the nibs are gone, and the frets are so short that if I were to struggle to try and cut a fret at the precise, very precise length to fit exactly between the two faces of the binding, which is virtually impossible to do anyway, but if I tried to do that and succeeded, the nibs would not be tall enough to reach the top of the fret anyway, so those nibs are going to go. They are no good. Not going to rebind this neck, so the binding will stay flush with the fretboard, which is the way 90% of all other instruments are done anyway. And virtually all refret jobs on these old Gibsons is done in the traditional way of fret installation, which is what I'm doing today. Going to now start pulling frets. How to get started on this? It kind of depends. It depends on how it goes. So I'm going to try the easy way, and I will just kind of graduate up to different methods depending on how it goes. And the first one is going to kind of tell me how this job's going to go. Now, what I mean by that is that they may be in there really, really hard, and I don't think they're glued in. As we use this tool the proper way, it will wedge in under it and support the wood and pull the fret up a little bit. And I'm hoping that goes easily. If it doesn't, I will have to heat up the fret, and that's not hard to do. I have kind of an inexpensive soldering iron I use for that. What I'm going to do here is get on top of that fret and get flush on the fretboard and square it up. I could even try to get over the edge to try and squeeze under this fret without pulling the whole fret up at once. Now, if you look here, you can see that I have begun to pull that fret up. When the jaws of the nipper closed, it came right up. I don't see any chip out at the moment. And I'm not, the key to this, the secret to this really is don't pull the tool, because you're just going to yank the wood out and chip out a whole bunch of this rosewood. That will really help support the grain. It's really the key to this. That's why I emphasize that so much. So I can see a whole lot more crud. I've got it started, but as I do this, now I'm able to get the tool under it everywhere, and a whole bunch of crud coming up with it. But now I've got it already released, and it should just come right out. And there we go. So I really keep a close eye on this, and I'll use my magnifiers to look, because I don't want any chip out here. And if there is any, I want to glue them back in. Now keep in mind that the frets have a crown, so if there's any little bit of roughness to the wood right at the edge of the fret slot, that's going to be fine. The fret crown will cover it. So this is going to be a little more tedious than most because of the level of the dirt. And I don't want to really oil the fretboard now that I'm getting ready to sand it. And I've got bare wood on the side, so I would normally use some oil on a finished neck. Now, this actually went a little smoother than I expected, so I'm real happy with that. I'm going to try on the next one. It's probably the heaviest worn fret of all, is these three. These three are the worst. So let's get the fret nipper under there. Again, I'm going to go off the end a little bit. So when I grip this, I'm just getting the end of the fret, not the whole fret. I just want it to lift up here at the edge. Give it a little squeeze, push down a little more. Finally that side came up pretty easily. So I got the jaws to close on the fret tang, and that's good because now I can work them across. And just the slightest bit of motion to it. Now there's a bit of chip out, you see? So that's what I didn't want, but I'm prepared for it. And we'll get some glue and put that little chip down. Okay, so that's how it came out right there, with one chip stuck under the fret still. And there are some other chips here as well. But this is going to go back into the wood. And these other chips I want to glue down before they come up. What I have here is the little fret dam material. This is actually made of Teflon, or polytetrafluoroethylene, which I don't know why I memorized that, but that's what it's called. This material won't, no glue on earth will stick to this stuff. I don't know how they get it to stick to the pans, the frying pans, but your frying pans are usually coated with a layer of this. But what I do with it, and its intention here in this work, is to drop it into the fret slot before gluing, and that way you keep the fret slot clear. And this is a nice snug fit, which is good. So as I glue these frets, I'm going to, or glue the wood back in, I'm going to use the fret dam as a safeguard against getting glue down into that slot. Now, each slot is a little bit different width, but I cut it to fit the first fret, which is the narrowest slot, and then I will just kind of scoot it around like in this slot. I'll move it over a little bit when I get over there. So that's the tool I'm going to use. I've got two grades of glue. Now these are cyanoacrylate. I picked these up at the Rockler store. Tell you where I got stuff, which, as I said, is nearby. So I've got two grades here. One is medium and one is thin. I'm expecting the thin one will work the best, but we will see. Now I've also got some of these little pipette nozzles, and these came with my Glue Boost kit, and Glue Boost is a little bit different. Glue Boost is primarily a finish repair system, and they have truly the best accelerator. This stuff is the best accelerator anywhere. They even sell this at Rockler, but I got mine direct from Glue Boost when I bought the whole kit. What you do with that is tint the CA, cyanoacrylate, and then you can fix a finish with it if there's a chip in your guitar. So this is really, really close work I'm going to need to do here to get these chips salvaged. It's a salvage operation here, is what we're doing. Okay, so I've glued the little chips back in, and I'm hoping that will file and sand out well. Now the little Teflon strip should just pull out, but it is sticking a little bit. So there we go. Now I've got a good idea how the rest of these are going to go. It's a piece of work here. A piece of work. So the key to doing this is to manage your problems as you go, and not let them, don't move on to the next part until you've got this situation under control in the spot you just worked on. They should be pretty much invisible once this fretboard is leveled. And keep in mind too, the fret has width to it, so it'll cover the edge. It'll cover a lot of it. But our slot is clear, so we're in good shape here on that. It'll all look good when it's filed down or sanded down. Now I've got my little soldering iron that I picked up. This is a Harbor Freight tool, and it's totally fine. All it has to do is get hot. And this is actually heating up nicely, and I can even see some bubbling going on, which surprises me to see it heating up like that with some sort of a fluid-like material there bubbling. Oh, the smell is not pleasant. So let's see what I can do about getting the edge up on that fret. Oh, beautiful. Okay, so heat is the key. Maybe somebody had slipped some glue in there. You can glue these in after they're installed, actually. Oh, that came up so much nicer. Now I have done the 3rd fret and it looks nice. So no chip out. I don't see any. Let me get my handy dandy inspectors. And that looks great. So we found a way to prevent the chip out I got on this 2nd one. I got lucky on the 1st one though. It really didn't chip out there either. But since this is causing some bubbling, I'm going to have to say that there's, for some reason, some glue down in the slot. It's really working well. I can see whatever in there kind of coming up to the surface. I'm going to have to call it glue. It's got a very chemical smell to it when it gets hot. Oh my, that's great. Okay, so I'm going to do the same technique all the way down the fretboard. So I can see here, it looks to me like what they did was at some point in time either refret it or simply drop some glue on the frets and let it go underneath. You can install a part and just drop the glue and it will seep down into the cracks and get underneath and glue it in. But that's one way to glue frets in. There are many ways to do everything. But I'm finding for this banjo on this day at this time, we have found how to do this. But you have to stay open-minded. On the original frets on a Gold Star, they're not glued in. And there's still a fair amount of chip out once in a while, but nothing like that 2nd fret slot that I got here today. That was pretty significant. So now I know what not to do. You want to kind of read your work. These instruments, they have a story, they have a history, and each one is a little different, like people. And depending on where they come from and how they were brought up, people come out different. And this one has had a history that is only slowly revealing itself. There's nobody alive who knows exactly what happened, so we just have to kind of try different things and find out. And here, I did not think there'd be any glue under these frets, but there appears to be. So melting the glue is the way to do this one. I can't tell you what that smell is like. It's a little like the smell of a hospital. Maybe it's the disinfectant they use, or it smells like disinfectant, I think, or a little like bug spray. Yeah, I think it smells like a can of Raid. It's not good. So we've got a few more to go. All of our slots are looking good. There are some tiny chip outs here, which are not serious because they don't extend back far enough to be visible once the new frets are put in. But I think what I might do here on this one is just a little touch of my thin CA glue and the narrow pipette tip right along there. We'll give it a little push down with this little metal strip right up against our fret slot dam, so the glue won't go in and the chips of wood are being held down, and we'll give it just a little shot of accelerator. So the chips were small. They really won't be visible, but I like keeping things as good as possible. Now, when you do these instrument repairs too, I talk about breaking eggs because as anybody doing this kind of work will tell you that whatever you do is going to be somewhat destructive. And you have to contribute to the problem before you can fix it. So we always have to kind of tear things up a little bit and then put it all back together. But it's never real pretty. It's always got kind of the scary part and the learning part and the messy part and putting up with sniffing bug spray or something that smells like bug spray when I heat up this glue. Ooh, I tell you. So we just work our way across. This one's coming out nicely. Yeah, that's how we do it. A lot of the instruments I work on, of course, don't have glue under the frets, but I've glued them in when it's necessary. And an instrument that's been fretted at least once before, whenever the frets are removed, it pulls some wood out with them. So the second time or third or fourth, whatever number of times the frets have been replaced, they won't necessarily fit nice and snug in the fret slots and stay in. They'll tend to spring out and they won't stay down. And that's destructive to your tone because you want a nice firm fret for the string to rest on to give you a good sound. And you want it to stay in. And if the fret slot is way too wide, you're just not going to get it done. So one way to do it, and we may be doing it on this one, is to get your fret all prepared. That's the one I glued. Get your fret all prepared, get it in the slot, and sneak some glue in there. Some of this thin CA is what works well for that. I have used other glues to glue frets in, and they all work. You know, some adhere to metal better than others. Using an air dry glue isn't very good because there's not a lot of air and you have to wait until they dry before you can move on. So you're just stuck, you know, you keep getting stuck. Now, I would caution you not to use a heat gun, not to use an external source of heat that heats up the whole fretboard, because you can loosen the fretboard from the neck, and you could end up taking the whole fretboard off the neck, and you don't really want to do that if you're just fixing the fret problem. The next thing I want to do is knock the nut out. The nut was glued in along the bottom as it brought up a little bit of mahogany with it. The nut's actually acceptable. I'd like to make it look a little nicer. You could use cleaning up, but I'll probably use some files on it to dress it a little bit. It's a bone nut, and that's nice. It's in really good shape, actually. All right, so now I can actually start leveling the fretboard, and part of my leveling will be to level out the chip repair I made here and the other little high spots. And this wood always comes up a little proud at the slot, so it's good to get those filed down, and then we can move along with the refret. But for now, that's going to be it. We got all the frets out, we got the nut out, and we are prepared to move to the next stage. So we're looking pretty darn good here, I will say that. And if you've stayed through this video with me, I do appreciate it. This material is just a little bit more exciting than pulling teeth. Pulling old dirty frets isn't much more glamorous, and a little bit more interesting than watching paint dry, perhaps. I think the most interesting was just discovering, you know, what the kind of the history of this neck was and how they got glue under those frets. I'm not sure, but smelly glue indeed. That's, I'm sorry you couldn't experience that along with me. You did miss out, I can tell you that. Somebody asked me, I want to answer a question the viewer had about the vise in particular, but the answer is the same. I got the vise from the same place I got my fret nippers, which have been very handy and very great. One of the best tools I've ever had. My hammer and, you know, a bunch of other things, but I have some tools from other companies. The company I'm talking about is StewMac. Everybody who does instrument repair or makes instruments knows about StewMac. And it's kind of a love-hate relationship because their tools are really great and they are very high quality, but they're also, the flip side is they're extremely expensive. I found this one on sale one day, and that's when I decided to finally pull the trigger. But yeah, you will end up spending a chunk at StewMac, but sometimes you just can't resist because they're so good. That's kind of how it works with them. We've got more to do on this neck. It is as stripped down as it's going to get. We're going to start putting this back together so we can have a playable banjo once again. So be sure to like and subscribe and hit the bell so you won't miss the next video when it comes out here from Beyond Guitars.